Hello and welcome to Spill the Tea. True Stories, the place where real life is more fascinating than fiction. Sit back, pour yourself a cup of tea, and let's dive into the moments that stay with us forever. We're starting now. A Monday in July was drawing to a close when Eleanor Davis suddenly felt that she had died. The feeling came over her completely unexpectedly. She was sorting through her husband's bag, grumbling softly. He had returned the day before from a sanatorium where his mother had been staying. Arthur, engrossed in a blockbuster on the TV screen, didn't hear his wife's complaints. 30 years old and still like a little child, the thought flashed through her mind. I have to sort it out myself. Why do I have to do everything? She grumbled, suspecting that her mother-in-law, Patricia, had packed dirty laundry to travel light on the way back. Arthur heard neither her discontent nor her surprised gasp. "Oh!" Eleanor exclaimed aloud, and mentally added, there's your trusting idiot. Perfect family life? Here you go, sign on the dotted line." Among her mother-in-law's things was some underwear. This item of personal clothing, the stout Patricia could only have fit on her arm, certainly not on the intended place. After this discovery, it was as if a light bulb went off for Ellie, as if all the scattered puzzle pieces suddenly fell into place. The picture of their family life, which had seemed flawless, appeared in full, horrifying clarity. Arthur was cheating on her. Hiding behind plausible excuses, he was basely betraying their relationship. He didn't care about her feelings, about 7 years of marriage that had seemed so solid. After all, they had overcome hardships together, rejoiced in each other's successes without a trace of envy, not counting who contributed more to the family budget. Even the absence of children, which worried both mothers, they saw as temporary. Ellie was only 18 when she got married, and only recently had thoughts of starting a family begun to appear in her head. Arthur hadn't brought up the topic, and she herself was too shy to even hint at it. But now the question of adding to the family had receded into the background. A much sharper problem had arisen, and a furious desire to throw a huge scandal at her husband seized Eleanor. She wanted to burst into the room and slap Arthur across the face with that very item. The first surge of anger quickly faded when the woman realized she was still holding the rival's underwear. It felt incredibly disgusting. Ellie crumpled the evidence of betrayal and threw it back into the bag. Her long-standing interest in basketball hadn't been in vain. A fraction of a second later, the incriminating evidence was back where it had been so unexpectedly found. Suddenly, Eleanor found it hard to breathe. Fortunately, the washing machine was in the kitchen, and she, overcoming the pain where the wound of betrayal now gaped, took a couple of steps and sank onto the small sofa. What if Arthur wasn't to blame for any of this? Maybe her mother-in-law accidentally picked up her roommate's underwear. You never know, maybe the room was cramped or there was only one closet for two. Although her relationship with her mother-in-law had recently become quite normal, Ellie didn't want to call Patricia and clarify if such an oddity could have happened. For some reason, she felt ashamed. Surprisingly, she felt as if she herself was to blame for everything. The loud sound of the adventure film came from the room, preventing her from concentrating and calmly thinking about how to behave with her husband and how to punish him if he had indeed decided to have fun on the side. Ellie meticulously went through all the soul-scratching moments in her memory. The most important thing was his regular absences. For about a month, Arthur had spent almost all his free time without her, citing some strange reasons for his absences. Individually, they could perhaps be called legitimate, justified, but there had been too many of them lately. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, her husband would say something like, "Honey, I'm going to the dacha in the morning. I'll fill the tank with water, water the beds while there's water." Or, "I'll stay a bit late at work to catch up." The boss was accommodating and allowed this schedule before the weekend. Arthur also said he had promised to help a friend or that there was a team-building event at work. Yes, all these oddities had been going on for about a month. And in the last 2 weeks, Arthur's sense of filial duty had suddenly sharpened. While Patricia was recuperating at the country sanatorium, he drove to her apartment every other day to water the flowers. You see, it was hot outside. The apartment at noon resembled a sauna, and his mother's favorite plants could suffer. Why, even the owner herself didn't care for those violets so tenderly. Now Ellie clearly saw the strangeness in her husband's behavior. Usually the flower chores fell on her shoulders, but not this year. Arthur, hugging her affectionately, said that she was already very tired, and these worries weren't a burden to him at all. And Ellie had suggested moving her mother-in-law's adored flowers to the bathroom, where it was always cooler, and turning on grow lights there so there wouldn't be a lack of light. But her husband objected to this quite reasonable suggestion. He seemed to argue sensibly. Water, electricity unsupervised, not the best option. But her heart was still uneasy. Eleanor was very worried and didn't know what to do. It would be good, of course, to talk to someone and get outside advice. But who could she turn to? The most obvious, yet most unfortunate option, was to call her mom. Upon hearing about her daughter's suspicions regarding Arthur's fidelity, she would get very upset, would surely take valerian drops, and then her blood pressure would rise. No, Mom absolutely could not be worried. Ellie didn't have any close friends with whom she could discuss such a delicate topic. She had many acquaintances, kind and friendly women, but she wouldn't dare to talk to any of them about family problems with her husband. It would cause completely unnecessary pity, and a leak of personal information was impossible to exclude. Her reputation as a happy, prosperous woman would go down the drain. And the CEO had an original quirk. Only people who were doing well from his point of view could hold key positions. A harmonious home environment, in his opinion, favorably reflected on work achievements. After a divorce or less significant troubles, like a discovered affair, employees were transferred to another position. All formalities were observed. The person didn't seem to lose salary, and no bad entries appeared in their work record. But Ellie absolutely didn't want to experience such changes. So, there was no one to expect advice on how to live next. That meant she would have to manage on her own. Gray spots danced before Ellie's eyes, which always heralded the onset of a migraine. The woman winced. That was all she needed. If this ailment flared up, she would be incapacitated for a couple of days. And tomorrow there was a meeting with the commercial director. How inconvenient everything was. And all this, the find, damn it. Or more precisely, Arthur and his betrayal. Speak of the devil. The culprit of Ellie's headache appeared in the kitchen. He behaved as if nothing had happened. He turned on the kettle, made a couple of sandwiches, looked at his bag, and turned to his wife. Ellie, come on, stop fussing with the chores. I'm going to Mom's tomorrow. I'll throw everything in her washing machine there, so I don't have to haul it back and forth, Arthur continued. And anyway, let's go watch a movie. It's really good. I didn't even expect it. Arthur began to briefly retell the plot to his wife, but Ellie interrupted him. She had no strength to listen to empty chatter after finding the incriminating evidence. No, thanks. I think I'll just lie down here. I'm a bit tired. It was a heavy Monday. Okay, then I'll turn the sound down, Arthur agreed. And don't you turn on the washing machine either. How can you rest with it running? Should I turn off the light? Ellie nodded, feeling a pang of pain. She didn't want to talk to the cheater at all. Arthur placed what he had prepared on a tray, grabbed his bag, and left the kitchen, closing the door behind him. In the darkness, the headache eased a little, and the woman didn't even notice how she fell asleep. In the morning, Ellie opened her eyes, mentally relieved that the migraine, apparently, had decided to spare her. The night's rest had been very beneficial. Even the certainty of her husband's betrayal was no longer as strong as it had been the day before. Instead, the version that someone else's underwear had gotten mixed up with her mother-in-law's things seemed the most realistic. Ellie stretched out on the sofa, once again glad that she had insisted on buying it. She started getting ready for work, while also making breakfast. Arthur usually woke up later, and this morning was no exception. By the time her husband appeared in the kitchen, Ellie had already had breakfast, left him food, and was already on the starting block. "Ellie, dear, don't expect me home early tonight," Arthur announced. "I'll swing by Mom's apartment right after work, do the laundry, and check on the flowers. She won't forgive me if anything bad happens to her green pets." Jealousy and resentment stung again. The woman almost recoiled when Arthur, as always, came to kiss her, but she managed to endure the usual morning ritual. Eleanor hurried to work because she needed to get her usual routine tasks done before the meeting. However, it was difficult to concentrate. Her thoughts involuntarily returned to yesterday's find in her husband's bag. At the meeting, the commercial director even made a remark. "Eleanor, is the topic of our meeting not interesting to you at all?" "Why, Mr. Alexander? I'm listening very carefully," she replied. "Strange. You have such a distant look, as if you are somewhere far away." Knowing perfectly well what and how the commercial director spoke, Eleanor retold a few key points. Quite satisfied with the result, Mr. Alexander interrupted her and continued his speech. While the man rambled on at length, pouring out verbal water, the woman decided to follow her husband. Fortunately, she finished work at 5, and Arthur was staying late. There was nothing difficult about setting up an ambush near her mother-in-law's house. Her yard was a dead end, and there was only one road leading to it, at the turn of which was a cafe with panoramic windows. If you sat in a good corner, the view would be excellent, and there was no need to worry about Arthur stopping by for pastries. He wouldn't be dragged into that kind of cafe even with a lasso. After making her decision, the woman calmed down a little and hardly got distracted by thoughts of her husband's infidelity until evening approached. Only as evening neared did she start to tremble a little. After all, it was an unusual undertaking. You don't do something like this every day. Or, to be more precise, this would be her debut in the field of covert surveillance. At the cafe, Eleanor ordered fruit drink and a pastry that the saleswoman actively advertised to her. Only now did the woman, suspecting her husband of cheating, realize that, preoccupied with her worries, she had forgotten to have lunch. The strawberry filling in the pastry turned out to be unusually tasty, and waiting wasn't such a difficult task. Noticing her husband's car drive past the cafe, Eleanor continued her task. Following her husband was not difficult. He parked the car on the paved lot, took a sports bag from the back seat, and without looking around, entered her mother-in-law's building. A few minutes later, the light in the kitchen windows of her apartment came on. Eleanor froze in anticipation. If Arthur had a date, the mistress should soon appear. On a fine summer evening, there were many people on the street, as walking through the quiet courtyard was a shortcut. Her heart stopped every time attractive women walked past the entrance. However, everyone passed by. Only a few guys with beer entered the building. Under the cover of passers-by and bushes, the light in the windows went out, and the woman saw her husband leave the building alone with a clearly empty bag. It seemed he had waited for the washing machine to finish. Apparently, no one had come to him, and Ellie couldn't believe that the mistress rival lived in the same building of a modest Khrushchevka. It was too unlikely a version, unless it was for some melodramatic TV series. It was, in its cooled form, below-average enjoyment. Despite the fact that her surveillance debut didn't yield the expected result, Eleanor decided to observe her husband closely for a few more days. It wasn't such a difficult task. At least I'll bring clarity to this whole situation, the woman thought. It's okay that I have no experience and Arthur might notice me. I'll explain somehow. The morning surveillance on Wednesday was thwarted, although of course the fact that her husband woke up at the crack of dawn to go to the dacha was suspicious. However, Ellie simply couldn't afford to take time off work. In the evening, Arthur went home immediately after work. This calmed her down a little. Thursday also didn't bring Ellie any incriminating evidence against her husband. Moreover, he only visited his mother's apartment once during these days, as if he felt he was being watched by his wife. However, Eleanor understood that it was too early to relax. You never know what her husband's schedule of meetings with his mistress is, if he has one. Mentally scolding herself, the suspicious woman didn't even check her husband's phone. But in the call history, there were so many numbers, including repeated ones, that none of them immediately stood out. Reading messages and messengers also yielded nothing. Ellie knew there were online chats where correspondence disappeared immediately after exiting the session. However, the smartphone's browser history did not record visiting such sites. Realizing that she was just an ordinary person, not a trained specialist, Ellie decided to go all in. She tried to disrupt her husband's supposed meeting with his mistress. On Friday evening, she suggested, "Artie, love, we've been staying home too much. Maybe we could go on an impromptu excursion, like a weekend trip." Arthur smiled guiltily and spread his hands. "No, Ellie, I'm sorry. I'm going to Mom's on Saturday, you understand. I'll come back tired from there. I won't be up for walks. Sunday is also impossible. My colleagues and I agreed to go to a football match. And look at the stadium they've built, like a spaceship from some sci-fi movie," he added. "We need to see what our taxes are going towards, among other things." Ellie felt in her gut that her husband was lying to her. A lump in her throat made it hard to breathe. So, her assumptions were correct. Her husband's meeting with his mistress was scheduled for the weekend. The woman decided to go all in. "Listen, that's just wonderful. I'll go to Patricia's with you." "It feels a bit awkward. She's returning from the sanatorium in a week, if I'm not mistaken, and I haven't visited her once," Ellie insisted. "After the sanatorium, we'll drive around the area, and we'll have a spontaneous getaway." Arthur tried to dissuade his wife. "Ellie, you weren't feeling very well at the beginning of the week. I think you need to rest." "Ellie, don't be ridiculous," she replied. "Artie, it's even indecent not to visit your mother-in-law once. Besides, I just need a change of scenery." Eleanor hoped she would get to see her mother-in-law's neighbor. She was very persistent and succeeded in getting included in the trip to his mother's. Patricia was happy to see both her son and daughter-in-law. They had a wonderful time, walking along the well-maintained paths laid out among majestic trees. Even the summer heat in the dappled shade seemed less exhausting. Quick little red squirrels, tamed by visitors and staff, comically scampered along branches and descended to people to get a treat. Ellie had brought seeds and nuts for the walk. She held out the supplies to Arthur and Eleanor. "Try feeding these little animals yourselves. They're so funny. They use their paws just like hands." The squirrels fearlessly descended to the outstretched palms with treats, delicately took the goodies, and ate neatly, looking up with clever eyes. By one of the paths, Patricia introduced a woman she met to her daughter-in-law. "This is Annie, my roommate." The lady of almost immense size smiled kindly. Eleanor almost burst into tears. The hope that the item of women's clothing found in her husband's bag belonged to her mother-in-law's roommate was shattered. That item clearly could not belong to this woman. Trying not to show her disappointment and anger, Ellie continued the walk. But not a trace of her former serenity remained. Having said goodbye to Patricia, the couple left the sanatorium grounds. Arthur, completely oblivious to his wife's changed mood, suggested, "Well, shall we drive around the area, as we planned?" "Oh, Artie, I think I've had enough walking," Eleanor replied. "Let's just go home. I'm also kind of worn out." "And I have football tomorrow," Arthur added. "I don't seem old yet, but I already have to conserve energy." Irritated, Eleanor couldn't help but retort, "Yes, you're an old man, and it looks like I'm getting decrepit too." Arthur ignored his wife's displeased tone. He wasn't even bothered by the fact that Ellie didn't talk to him on the way home, attributing it all to her fatigue. Eleanor decided that the surveillance of her husband was crucial. Indeed, if he had a mistress, and he was supposedly going to football, of which he had never been a fan, it meant he was clearly going on a date. In the morning, Arthur got up very early, even earlier than his wife, and woke her up with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. When she entered the kitchen, the man had almost finished breakfast. "Okay, honey, I'm off," he announced. Ellie remarked sarcastically, "Isn't it a bit early? As I recall, the football match starts in the evening." The man tried to speak convincingly and calmly. "Well, we'll gather first, chat, and then head to the stadium." The woman stopped being sarcastic so her husband wouldn't get suspicious and asked, "Are you walking or driving?" "Driving. I'm not planning on drinking, and I don't want to deal with taxis or public transport. It's calmer for me. I'm my own master." "Okay, I understand. Then I'll get to the beauty salon myself. It's fine. Have a good time." Ellie tried to speak as calmly as possible. It seemed to her that her husband didn't even think that she didn't trust him and was planning to follow him. The parking lot was a 5-minute walk from the house. As soon as the door closed behind Arthur, Ellie called a taxi and quickly got dressed. The driver wasn't surprised by the passenger's request. Of course, it wasn't his first time participating in surveillance. "But if you'll allow me, I'll give you a piece of advice. Some secrets are better left unknown," he said. The man confidently drove the car, staying slightly behind the pursued vehicle. "I had a case with my first wife," the driver began. "She was always running off somewhere saying, 'I'm going to the store.' Then she'd drop by a friend's, then under some other pretext. It didn't occur to me right away. Of course, I had doubts. Is it pleasant to be a cuckold?" The driver, repeating Arthur's maneuver, turned into the parking lot near the supermarket. Choosing the best spot for observation, he turned off the engine and continued his story. "So, my wife tells me she's going to the store again. And I think she's going to the children's home for the mentally disabled. Her child lived there. She put him there because it was hard for her. And only someone who has faced such a misfortune themselves can judge her for that act," the taxi driver reasoned. "Well, I was like, in a white coat then, playing the part of a saintly sufferer. I almost went crazy. How could this be? They kept such a thing secret from me." Both Lucy and her mother were silent. "In the end, I caught her at the gates of that almshouse and made a scene. She didn't even try to justify herself somehow, she just said she knew we'd get divorced anyway," the driver recalled. "And whether it was because of truth or lies, what difference does it make?" The driver, without asking the passenger's permission, lit a cigarette and continued his confession. He paid no attention to how the column of ash grew longer. "I don't know what I would have done if she had told me the truth right away back when we were dating. Maybe I wouldn't have married her. Or maybe the opposite, I would have asked her to introduce me to the child," he mused. "Now I think I could have understood everything if only Lucy had been honest with me. But no, it was easier for her to deceive me. What would you have done in my place? Could you have forgiven?" Eleanor didn't know how to answer the taxi driver correctly. Her husband, appearing in the doorway of the store with 2 huge bags in his hands, saved her from having to voice her opinion. Especially since it wouldn't have been absolution for the man anyway. Arthur, not expecting surveillance, wasn't looking around. He quickly walked to the car and, placing his load in the trunk, drove on. The taxi driver, keeping a small distance, followed. He didn't say anything more, reliving the events of the past once again. The car turned off the highway onto a road perfectly familiar to Eleanor. Now, another 12 kilometers from the turn, and the Energetic Garden Cooperative would appear. Her mother-in-law had been allocated her legal 600 square meters there back in Soviet times. Ellie used to go there even before she was a bride, when she had just started dating Arthur. Patricia hadn't burdened her with much work then. And even now, she prefers to tend to the greenhouse and other plantings. She hasn't grown potatoes on her plot for a long time, filling the freed-up space with berry bushes. She has honeysuckle, strawberries, currants, raspberries, and gooseberries there. Where would a fan of Chekhov's talent be without it? The newly appeared cuckold turned on his blinkers, and the family car turned towards the dacha area. Continuing the surveillance by taxi was too noticeable. Eleanor asked the taxi driver to stop, and after paying, hurried towards her mother-in-law's plot. "Good luck," the driver wished her. "Remember, everything always happens for the best." Ellie hurried to her mother-in-law's plot and saw Arthur driving the car behind the gate. She rushed to the overgrown lilac bush near the abandoned dacha diagonally opposite. From there, she could see what was happening. Fortunately, her mother-in-law hadn't yet replaced the fence facing the street from low picket fence to metal profile sheets, and everything was almost in plain sight. Eleanor almost screamed with anger when a woman in a crop top and shorts flitted out onto the porch of the dacha house. The stranger's physique indicated that she could very well be the owner of the ill-fated find discovered in Arthur's bag. Smiling, the mistress took one of the bags from Arthur. It was obvious that they knew each other, but the phrases they exchanged were indistinguishable. The deceived woman left her hiding place and headed towards the dacha to make a loud scene for the traitor husband and his paramour, to the amusement of the neighbors. But she froze in place. Her father appeared on the porch. She hadn't seen him in almost a year. It was then that he basely announced to her mother that he had met and fallen in love with another woman. He said that their daughter was already grown up, and nothing else kept them together, so he was leaving home, taking the family savings as compensation for half of the apartment. Ellie had tried to influence her father then, begging him not to act rashly. She pleaded with him to think about the severe blow he was dealing to his wife, with whom he had lived for many years. She threatened to stop all communication with him if he destroyed the family. It was useless. Peter left his wife and tried to continue communicating with his daughter, congratulating her on holidays, but Ellie blocked his number. Then other numbers from which he called met the same fate. Her father stopped trying. Meeting her father's colleague, she learned that Peter had quit his job and moved somewhere out of town. Veronica would probably have gone crazy if it weren't for her daughter's support. Eleanor practically lived with her for several months and made sure her mother didn't do anything to herself. It's not easy to forget happy years of marriage erased by infidelity. Mom sobbed on her daughter's shoulder. "Can you imagine? He said he met the love of his life. And who was I to him then? Just a passerby? An incubator for his only daughter?" Learning this unexpected news and seeing her mother in such a state for the first time, Eleanor was in shock. She had always considered her parents' marriage unshakable, indestructible, like a rock. However, it turned out that all the years of family life could be very easily erased by one betrayal. A weight lifted from Eleanor's heart. She saw the tenderness with which her father hugged the woman unknown to her. She saw how he kissed her on the shoulder, and how readily he took the bag from her. It was obvious that this was the very rival, or, in his own words, the love of his life. Arthur looked at this disgrace completely calmly. Soon, the trio headed into the house. They didn't close the door, and Eleanor followed them inside. She greeted them with a voice ringing with indignation. "Hello, private company!" The woman saw astonished faces. Arthur was the first to react. "Ellie, how did you get here?" "Oh, I was just sitting at home, bored," Eleanor replied. "I thought let me go to the football match with my husband too. But here it's some kind of tango for three, not a match from behind the bushes." "Ellie, daughter, hello!" Peter exclaimed, snapping to attention. "I'm very happy to see you. Please meet her. This is Sophie. And this is my daughter, Ellie dear, my pride. This is the one I've told you so much about." Eleanor managed to see that the woman in the top and shorts was roughly her age, and she didn't stand on ceremony. "So this is her, the love of your life?" she asked. "The golden hand, leg, or what part of her body did she charm you with?" Eleanor continued. "I can't say it's nice to meet you, because I'm disgusted to see her in you, Arthur. And you've really disappointed me. I would never have thought you'd entertain your runaway father-in-law and his girl at your mother's dacha." "Don't you dare talk about Sophie like that!" Ellie's father exclaimed indignantly. "Oh, you'd think she's a delicate violet," Eleanor retorted sarcastically. "By the way, Sophie, didn't you lose your panties? My arty love seems to have accidentally picked them up along with some dirty towels. Is it inconvenient to wash here? Or is Sophie afraid of overworking her golden hands? Peter demanded. Ellie, stop! Enough of your malicious talk. Your husband is helping us at my request, and there's nothing wrong with that. He's a wonderful and responsive person. He's acting mercifully, while you're showing callousness and malice towards an innocent person. Well, I'd be ashamed to call your Sophie innocent, Eleanor countered. To take a husband away from a strong and prosperous family. To force him to quit a normal job with a stable income. To compel him to live not in a well-appointed apartment, but in a dacha house with a bio-toilet and a shower from a tank. Forgive me, Dad, but she's not in her first youth, she continued. Yes, wonderful, nothing to say. So, Sophie is simply a champion of improving conditions? Maybe she should even get a medal for her contribution to a happy approach to the grave. Peter's mistress was uncomfortable, but she remained silent. Ellie's dad also didn't interfere in his daughter's angry dialogue, which had shifted the vector of her anger towards her husband. It became clear to her that his dacha had become a refuge for the lovers. Arthur lowered his eyes, and Ellie didn't need any further verbal response. It became obvious to her that her husband hadn't cheated on her with another woman. But he had acted not much better. With Patricia's permission, whether out of a sense of male solidarity or for some other reason, he was indulging his father-in-law and his paramour. You sneaky ones, Eleanor gasped. How long have you been hiding this dacha refuge for lovers from me? A month? More? Daughter, calm down and let's talk, Peter suggested. It's not so simple. Yes, I bought all sorts of goodies, Arthur announced. Indeed, let's discuss everything at the table. Ellie didn't miss the chance to express her opinion once again about the woman she hated, the destroyer of her parents' family. I won't sit at the same table with this Sophie with the golden leg. The young mistress, shrugging, said, Pete, I'll go take care of the plants and pick some berries. Call me if you need help. Arthur gently touched his wife's hand and pleaded, Don't be angry, Ellie dear. I couldn't do otherwise, Arthur explained. After all, Peter isn't a stranger. And anyway, he's done a lot of good things for us. Eleanor pulled her hand away and without hesitation began to lecture. Yes, he's done a lot of good things. I barely saved Mom after his betrayal. I was afraid she'd do something bad, leave me an orphan, Ellie said. And it's all because of this Sophie. Turns out he found himself a viper. Peter, taking food out of the bags his son-in-law had brought, set the table and remained silent. The man knew perfectly well that his daughter had a quick temper, but cooled down quickly. Her husband would finish talking. Sighing, Ellie sank into her favorite armchair in her mother-in-law's dacha house and turned to her father. Well, tell me, newlywed, how did you end up living in the countryside? It used to be almost impossible to get you to visit the dacha. And here, I understand, you've been living for a month, she continued, and for some reason, far from civilization and all that. Peter smiled slightly. You're still a smart girl, you figured it out right away. Sophie and I actually have to hide. We got into a very ugly, terrible situation, he confessed. Now we have to hide from creditors. Eleanor was extremely surprised. How so? You were always strongly against loans? Her father shrugged. Well, even old folks slip up. That's how it happened. When I left your mom, Sophie and I moved to her town, he recounted. We bounced around rented apartments there. I did odd jobs. We saved money to buy a house within the city limits and start our own business. We even rented a suitable place that was very popular with the target audience. People started coming to us. But while we were in a practically suspended state, of course, there could be no talk of modest advertising or a big PR campaign, Peter explained. Sophie and I decided to make everything official, buy this house with the plot, and seriously develop everything on a normal scale. I had little money left. It somehow disappeared unnoticed. Sophie suggested borrowing from her acquaintances, he continued. Then everything happened like in a bad crime movie. We were robbed on the way to the deal. The car Sophie was driving under power of attorney from her friend was cut off. The fender was slightly dented, but luckily, at least we weren't injured. Oh, Ellie dear, if you had seen how Sophie defended me, you would never, ever call her bad names, her father said. She threw herself at the bandits like a tigress. She threatened and even shouted that if they touched me with even a finger, they wouldn't get anything at all, for anything. It was so brave, so sincere, but so reckless. I was truly scared for Sophie then, and I think I loved her even more, he confessed. I understand that because of Mom, it might be unpleasant for you to hear this, but I don't want to lie to you. In short, they mentally pressured us and named a debt amount that was completely out of line. So, as they say, we had to disappear from the horizon. There weren't many options where we could hide, Peter continued. We just need to lie low until Sophie's friend, who has connections in high circles, returns from a trip to India. She went there for enlightenment. One of the main conditions her guru set was a complete break from reality, an absolute refusal of all forms of contact with the past. So I had to turn to Arthur as my closest person, he sighed. I felt very awkward. If it weren't for him, who knows if I'd be alive now or not. I'm very glad that my son-in-law agreed to solve our housing problem and provide us with everything we needed. Many thanks, even huge thanks to Patricia as well. She understood our situation, allowed us to stay here, her father said. No one will think to look for us here, so we can relax. I understand that Sophie and I are practically a heavy burden on your family budget, but I promise, as soon as our situation improves. He spread his hands, showing that he didn't expect any compensation. Eleanor clarified. Mess up, Dad? And couldn't you have gone to the police? If these bandits damaged the car, especially someone else's, and tried to intimidate you, they should be held accountable. There must be some way to deal with them. I think you absolutely must file a report. Of course, an investigation on the spot won't work anymore, she continued. But you have to fight this lawlessness somehow. Oh, Ellie, how naive you still are, her father chuckled. Sophie said that their local police station is bought off completely. If you go to them, you could lose your health or even your life without trial or investigation. But aren't there various oversight bodies above the police? Eleanor wondered. The prosecutor's office or something like internal affairs? It's better not to go to them either, her father waved his hand. It's like going into water without knowing the ford. You still need a direct contact with someone from the staff for a normal result, then the case won't stall. Sophie's friend will return, then we can try, he said. But for now, we have to sit quietly. So, these are the things, Ellie dear. In my old age, I've ended up in such a mess that I wouldn't wish it on an enemy. Thank you. Your husband and his mother have been merciful to me and Sophie. Otherwise, I'd probably be rotting somewhere buried like a dog by now, Peter finished. He stood up, looking like a tired man, not at all a happy lover. Somehow the resentment for her mother faded into the background. She didn't want to be sarcastic or comment on the boomerang that had returned. After all, this man with anxiety in his eyes continued to be her dad, the same one who taught her to ride a bicycle, supported her in difficult situations, and explained math and physics problems. He supported her when she decided to marry Arthur at 18. Her mother had insisted then that she shouldn't rush. And her father reminded her that they, in fact, also got married almost a week after their high school graduation party. Arthur, sensing that Eleanor's mood had warmed up, decided not to push his luck further. He asked his father-in-law slyly, "Peter, are you hungry?" "Let's at least have some tea and sandwiches," he suggested. The man was embarrassed, realizing that he was essentially treating his daughter and son-in-law at their own expense, and added, "Remember, Ellie dear, what your grandmother used to say, using your own lard to grease your own palms?" For the first time on this difficult day, the woman smiled genuinely. "Yes, and I always used to ask her what grease your own palms meant," Ellie recalled. Grandma would explain it to me every time as if it were the first. It was like a little ceremony for us. Dad, I'm sorry, but I really don't feel like eating, Eleanor said. Too much news for today, and tomorrow's a work day, she continued. I need to get a good rest before it, and before that, I still need to have a serious talk with Arthur about secrets in family life. Although, judging by Eleanor's tone, the main emotional storm had passed. Arthur hugged his wife and lowered his head guiltily. Peter began to thank his son-in-law again, not forgetting to put in a good word for him. Thanks for everything. Go, get some rest. Just, daughter, don't be angry with your husband and don't scold him. He's golden. If anyone is to blame, it's me. Eleanor left her favorite armchair and froze, not knowing how to proceed. Should she hug and kiss her dad, with whom she hadn't spoken for many years, or just say goodbye? Each of these options seemed unsuitable to her. Sophie diffused the situation. Here, I've gathered some for you and Patricia, she said, holding out a basket of berries. As far as I know, she should be back from the sanatorium soon. We'll manage to figure out where to move by then, so we don't inconvenience you. At the words of her father's mistress, anger stirred in Eleanor's soul again. How smartly you dispose of other people's things and don't inconvenience yourself, she thought. Of course, Arthur put his arm around his wife's waist and gently but persistently pulled her towards the exit. Eleanor let him, feeling terribly tired from both the surveillance and the news that had fallen upon her. Peter went to see his daughter and son-in-law to their car. With a gesture, he asked Sophie to stay in the house so as not to provoke another outburst of hatred. On the way home, Ellie tried not to show her irritation at the situation that had developed in her life. Her husband was faithful, and she mentally praised herself for not sharing her suspicions with her mom. However, how to react to her father's partial return was completely unclear. Fearing that her distracted glance at her father in trouble wasn't sincere, she thought about Sophie. She brought berries as if she had picked them from her own dacha, generous with other people's property. At home, Arthur tried to anticipate his wife's every wish to make her mood better. After dinner, he finally decided to apologize. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about Peter right away. I was afraid you'd be angry. You were right to be afraid, Eleanor replied. For me, Dad's action was the end of my childhood, she confessed. You know, I actually thought for a long time that I wouldn't even talk to him, even if he begged for a meeting. But then I ran into him, and I felt sorry for him. Oh, I'm afraid this Sophie definitely doesn't have pure intentions living with my father in a house with partial amenities. Arthur tried to justify his father-in-law's new paramour. Ellie, you yourself understand that it's not entirely fair to judge a person without knowing their story. Sophia seemed to treat Peter with great tenderness. She cooks food and keeps the dacha tidy. And anyway, my dear, I think you're being picky about her, he continued. She had a very difficult past, but she didn't become bitter. Can you imagine, at 18, she had an elderly grandmother, a younger sister, and a little brother to care for. Despite all this, Sophie managed to get an education herself, a vocational one, but in a sought-after profession. Well, I'm absolutely not interested in the biography of this schemer, Eleanor cut in. Arthur, have you fallen under her influence too? How predictable you men are. A cunning woman pulls the wool over your eyes, and you're ready to defend her and break up families because of her. Ellie, you just didn't see how tenderly she cares for Peter, Arthur insisted. It's impossible to fake that, and how she defended him during the attack. But you didn't see that, Eleanor reasonably countered. Fear has big eyes, and it's quite possible that the incident was completely different. The woman was angry and didn't want to develop the topic of her father's relationship with his girlfriend at all, so she put an end to it. Okay, maybe it's none of my business. I'll just tell you one thing. It would probably be sensible for my dad and this girlfriend of his to rent a dacha in the same area, she suggested. I think there were a few options. Arthur supported his wife's idea. Of course, you're right. My mom is used to being alone everywhere, both in the city apartment and at the dacha. She won't like it if someone else is in charge on her territory at the same time. I'll post an announcement in the dacha chat right now that we'll rent a dacha for at least the rest of the season, he said. I'll be driving mom anyway, and this way I can also drop by Peter's. And then, as your dad said, this neighbor's influential friend will return, and maybe the whole situation will be resolved peacefully. Actually, we have bank accounts, you and we could withdraw money and help Peter out, Arthur suggested. Are you serious? Eleanor exclaimed indignantly. Dad betrayed me and Mom. You haven't experienced 100th of the emotional suffering we have. And now I'm supposed to give him my savings and yours? And lose interest too? She fumed. A big fat zero for them, not money. Okay, honey, calm down, Arthur hurried. I understand. We won't touch the accounts. When talking to her mother and meeting her, Ellie was afraid of letting slip that she knew where her father was. And Patricia also kept Peter's secret. They couldn't rent a well-appointed dacha, but Arthur was offered a neglected plot almost at the edge of the area for practically free, just paying for water and electricity. The location would have been the worst for people who went to the dacha for the harvest. But for forced fugitives, it was hard to imagine a better option. Peter and Sophia, gathering their few belongings, moved to the new place. Arthur continued to provide them with everything necessary, and soon, this became very irritating to Ellie. Firstly, funds were taken from the family budget with noticeable damage. And secondly, and most importantly, the woman found it disgusting to support her father and his mistress. Ellie felt that by doing so, she was betraying her own mother. Keeping the secret was becoming increasingly difficult, especially since her mother-in-law was planning to celebrate her anniversary at the dacha in early August. This worried Eleanor. A meeting between Mom and Dad at Patricia's dacha absolutely could not be allowed. A week before the celebration, the woman asked Arthur to take her to the dacha so she could have a serious talk with her father. She wanted to firmly explain that he and this Sophie with the golden leg should stay in the house practically without leaving next weekend. Leaving her husband and mother-in-law, they headed towards Peter's dacha. Eleanor knew that many owners of these 600 square meters had long abandoned them. It was almost impossible to drive along the street because of the sea buckthorn and lilac bushes that had felt their freedom. But the lush vegetation provided shade, which was so saving in the abnormally hot August. Eleanor walked unhurriedly, rehearsing what and how she would say. Almost at the gate of the desired plot, the woman heard a hateful voice. Ellie wanted to go in and tactlessly interrupt someone else's conversation, but then some eighth sense made her stop. Her father's mistress's words were very unexpected. No, Mark, I told you it's not working out yet, Sophie was saying. This annoying Eleanor is ruining my whole plan. If it weren't for her, I would have gotten everything out of these fools by now. As it is, I have to live in someone else's dacha, go to the toilet outside, wash when the water in the tank heats up. The worst thing is having to look devotedly into the eyes of this elderly idiot, she complained. It's a good thing that because of this heat, his attraction to me disappears, and I don't have to go to bed with him. Although it's not even a bed here, it's outright mockery. Ah, dear Mark, you probably won't even recognize me after these few months, Sophie continued. I haven't been to a spa, I haven't gone to fitness, and I haven't even visited a cosmetologist. I'm an outright scarecrow. But for this fool Pete, it'll do. I just need to persuade him to sell his share of the apartment here, and then we'll get that housing. Real estate prices here are almost like in the capital, she said. That money, along with what we got from the supposed robbery, will be enough for us to leave here and live normally somewhere on the coast. Sophie's intonation changed from irritated to whining. It was clear how artistically cynical the woman was manipulating her interlocutor. However, this delight would have been much stronger if Sophie were an actress. Now it was completely unclear when her father's paramour was lying. Ellie was almost not surprised by what she heard. She had suspected something like this. Fortunately, she had the sense to turn on the voice recorder on her phone. If necessary, everything could be understood. By the end of the conversation, her father's mistress's speech was a continuous string of exclamations. She talked about how much she missed him, and it became incredibly interesting to Eleanor how Sophie would react now if she knew that there was incriminating evidence against her. Eleanor restrained herself, waited until her father's mistress finished her conversation, and only then came out of hiding. It was obvious to Ellie that Sophie was extorting money, but because it was difficult to prove, she decided to leave things as they were. So she needed to provoke the greedy Sophie and show her dad the true nature of the woman because of whom he had destroyed a happy family. Deciding that she wouldn't hear anything new, Eleanor turned off the recording and headed towards the house. She no longer felt pathetic or offended. Now she was vengeful and gloating. Having heard the conversation, she couldn't help but retell it to her father. "Oh, hello, Ellie dear. Please come in," Sophie greeted her. "I made some soup here. It's tasty, I think. Let me offer you some for now, and then Dad will come. He went to the spring, thinking no one he knows would meet him there." Eleanor didn't say everything she wanted to. She clarified, "Has Dad been living with you long?" Sophie replied, "Not much interesting." Meeting her father on the forest path, Ellie asked, "Listen to me and try to believe. Sophie is just using you to get money. The attack on you and her was staged, and here at the dachas she's hiding with you from imaginary danger," she said. "Here, listen to the recording I made." Peter listened to Sophie's recorded speech, and his face changed. She felt sorry for him, but she didn't stop the recording. It was better to swallow the bitter pill right away. "Yes, daughter, modern technology has come a long way," he said when the recording ended. "Admit it, you just somehow managed to synthesize Sophie's voice to make me quarrel with her." Eleanor was disheartened. She understood that her father's feelings for the brazen, unscrupulous liar were deep. All attempts to tell or even provide visual evidence that the mistress intended to become the owner of elite real estate at the expense of others would be met with displeasure and even scandals. She had to somehow convince her father, open his eyes. "Dad, I'm asking you, don't rush to get money for her," Eleanor said. "She'll come up with something else to fleece you. So, I'll set up a test for her. I'll say that we've been brought money to pay off the debts. And you and Arthur will watch her to understand how she'll act," Eleanor suggested. "It would be good to have a few strong guys help us. I think that's doable." "Dad," Eleanor replied, "let's go to our place for now to discuss all the details." Without looking into his overgrown house, Peter headed towards his son-in-law's place, accompanied by his daughter. In the evening, the mistress again noticed that Peter was cold towards her, but didn't attach much importance to it, especially since this estrangement suited her completely. Only when the man announced that his son-in-law had agreed to provide the money, but only in cash, did Sophie almost jump for joy. "My beloved sunshine, now we can return to our usual way of life," she exclaimed. "Isn't it a miracle?" Arthur smiled. So far, everything was going exactly as they had planned. Thanks to one of his friends, he managed to enlist the help of former Special Forces soldiers to apprehend the fraudsters. When Sophie's accomplices arrived at the dacha, squeezed with difficulty along the narrow street, the brave guys apprehended them. They treated Sophia very delicately. Peter, stepping close, announced, "You, Sophie, despite your wise name, wanted to deceive me again. But you didn't take into account that you talked too much and in the wrong places," he said. "Fortunately, Ellie overheard your disgusting conversation. So, if you don't want to end up in prison for fraud, and drag your fools with you, then pay me back what you stole from me with the help of your friends." Sophie had no choice but to write a receipt. A tired Peter asked Arthur to give him a ride to the city and hurried to his wife. On the way, he bought a luxurious bouquet of flowers. "Veronica, it's like water under the bridge for me," he began. "Let's try to start our relationship over." Veronica smiled at her ex-husband. He thought he had already found the key to her heart. But the woman suddenly announced, "Actually, I've already started a new love story, and you don't fit into it. So, if you want to be honest." "After all, during the divorce you took almost everything you brought and I didn't fight for a single thing," she said. "If they were important to you, you took them," Veronica continued. "And now you suddenly realized you undersold yourself, ended up with nothing. Although with the money returned by Sophie N.,